like to call the committee to order. I would like to remind the audience to be respectful of our witnesses today. Outbursts will not be tolerated and disruptors will be asked to leave the room. I want to thank Director Clapper. I guess the witnesses are not here yet, but I still would like to thank Director Clapper for assembling a panel of witnesses for this morning's hearing on worldwide cyber threats. We know that all of the witnesses' time is very valuable, and we want to take advantage of that today, so I'll keep my comments brief. This committee has traditionally hosted an open worldwide threats hearing to better educate the public on current dangers we face, as well as to showcase how the intelligence community is working to combat these threats. The focus of this hearing is cybersecurity, or given the current state of affairs, cyber insecurity. Over the last several years, cyber attacks have become a commonplace in the United States. Anthem Blue Shield, Home Depot, Sony, Target, JP Morgan, Chase, and other companies, just to name a few, have been subject to major attacks, resulting in the compromise of personal information of employees and customers alike. But these are just the breaches we hear about in the news. There are many more, both large and small, occurring each and every day across our nation. The U.S. government is certainly not immune. OPM, IRS, the Pentagon's Joint Chief of Staff, the Joint Staff, and just this morning we learned that the Department of Energy was successfully hacked 159 times. These high-profile assaults are eroding confidence in our government's ability to counter the threat. I share the public's concern. In fact, I recently learned that the very apparatus that the Department of Homeland Security uses to allow the private sector to share cyber threat indicators with the government, the Protected Critical Infrastructure Information Program, has not had a security audit since 2006. This raises serious questions about an agency that many government representatives believe should be at the heart of our cybersecurity strategy. I want to place the intelligence community on notice that we will be requesting information regarding your cybersecurity practices and procedures in the coming months. The government should not even think to impose standards on the private sector before it can maintain the security of its own systems. As Congress continues to debate information sharing legislation, we must ensure that the government entities involved in the sharing process are absolutely secure, especially if we allow the private sector to share cyber threats with just one government entity such as DHS. In closing, I call on the Senate to take up the cyber sharing legislation. Seemingly every day, another breach is exposed with severe implications to our economy, our privacy, and our national security. The time has come to put politics aside and give our country the tools it needs to defend itself from these malicious attacks. And with that, I'll yield to the ranking member, Mr. Schiff.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, directors, for joining us today. Thank you so much for your service to the country. I'm pleased that we're holding this hearing in open session, and it's telling that our committee open hearings this year have been focused on cyber, the challenge of securing our networks, and the related issues of encryption and terrorist use of social media are among the most pressing challenges that we face. The threat to our public and private networks is all too apparent. In the past year alone, we have seen highly publicized hacks of Sony Pictures, not far from my district, intrusions into health insurance providers Premera and Anthem, and the devastating hack into the Office of Personnel Management. These three instances, which took place in the context of thousands of other intrusions every day, show the breadth, scale, and crippling potential of the threat to our economy, our privacy, and our national security. There are no simple answers to these problems. In fact, some of the steps we can take to better secure our data and our privacy can have unintended consequences. A good example are the largely welcome efforts to make our networks more private and more secure by using pervasive encryption, so that even if hackers steal the data, it would be gibberish without the key to decode it. The broader adoption of strong encryption, however, particularly in communications, can simultaneously allow terrorists and criminals to plot in ways that law enforcement and the intelligence community cannot access, even with a valid warrant. Even open communications on the Internet pose a challenge. Social media has proven a democratizing force throughout the world, but is now increasingly being used by groups like ISIS to spread messages of hate, repression, and violence. So the question is what we do about cybersecurity, the unintended consequences of encryption, and the use of social media to radicalize. These are immensely challenging and inextricably linked problems, and I don't profess to know all the answers. nor should anyone in Washington. But I do want to lay out several principles that should guide our response. First, we need to have a broad discussion across industry, government, academia, and the public. Last week, I went to Silicon Valley, where I held a series of very productive sessions with a number of leading tech companies. I'll continue to have these conversations, and I encourage others to sit down with them as well. We in D.C. just can't tell tech to figure it out. We have to work with them and others to find the best mix of incentives, standards, and technological solutions. In these discussions, we in government must also recognize legitimate economic considerations of our globally oriented tech sector and the excellent work they already do voluntarily addressing some of these issues. At the same time, we have to recognize the legitimate need of the populace for privacy, legitimate need of law enforcement and the intelligence personnel to keep us safe, and the industry's legitimate need to protect intellectual property from hackers. This collaboration should also take place on a technical level, and I'm pleased to see government agencies like DHS and NSA, for example, continue to partner with universities through grants and cyber challenges to develop safer and more secure technologies and to deepen this country's cyber literacy. We need to do more of this academic and technical collaboration. Second, government and the private sector must take joint ownership of the problem of cybersecurity. It's no longer enough for senior government officials or corporate leaders to simply call in tech support, nor can we afford leaders who take pride in not understanding the technology that underpins their organizations. Third, we must grow the government's cadre of cyber experts. We must invest in and attract the best, the brightest, and the most creative to work on behalf of the nation's security. The digital revolution was made possible through the marriage of technical savvy and creativity, art, and science, those who could identify the need and those who could fill it. We must keep this in mind as we develop our bench of cyber experts. Fourth, we have to develop and communicate in advance proportionate responses to foreign nations' cyber attacks and intrusions to generate a deterrent. For example, in the wake of the attack on Sony, North Korea must face tangible, meaningful consequences, and others must know the potential consequences of future attacks or offensive cyber action. And fifth, we need to advance legislation that catalyzes solutions. Our Cyber Information Sharing Bill, the Protecting Cyber Networks Act, would do exactly that. This measure would essentially crowdsource solutions to cyber threats by allowing private industry and the government to share malware in order to understand it and create solutions to defend against it. Already there are private-public cyber information sharing arrangements which are proving invaluable, be it the Defense Industrial Base or the Energy Department's Cybersecurity Risk Information Sharing Program, or among the private sector, as in Facebook's Threat Exchange. This legislation, which has passed the House and is awaiting action in the Senate, would allow these models to go nationwide. Ultimately, the threat of a cyber attack presents no easy solutions. Offense is cheap and relatively easy, while defense is expensive and far more complex. Means of communications that secure our privacy can be used by some to threaten our security, and social networks designed to bring us together can be used to try to tear us apart. But these complex challenges are not an excuse to throw up our hands. I believe that through close collaboration and discussion, we can take steps to better secure both public and private networks from intrusion in order to save lives and jobs. I look forward to hearing from our witnesses about how we can do just that. I thank you, Mr. Chairman, and yield back.
I thank the gentleman. In an effort for this committee to do a better job of providing oversight, we created an NSA Cyber Committee this Congress, and the chairman of that committee I'd like to recognize for an opening statement is Mr. Westmoreland from Georgia.
Thank you, Chairman, and I appreciate our witnesses taking the time out of their busy schedules today to come and testify. And as the chairman of the NSA and the Cyber Subcommittee, I've had an opportunity to see cybersecurity from a unique position. I've witnessed the amazing talent and tireless work undertaken by certain elements of our government, represented here today, and by particularly the NSA ability to identify and defend against cyber threats. At the same time, I've witnessed the shocking incompetence of other elements in our government, which have resulted in unprecedented privacy breaches and threaten our national security. It is essential that everyone understands the gravity of this situation. We are under attack right now in the United States. Every second, every day, there are attacks occurring somewhere in this country. Some appear relatively harmless. Others are clearly a threat to our economy, our privacy, and our national security. In recent years, we have witnessed the theft of our nation's industrial secrets, attacks on our financial institutions, and much more. While it is important to keep sensitive programs classified, these types of open hearings provide much-needed education to the public. I want to commend the chairman for having this open hearing. We are only as strong as our weakest link, and the security of our networks is all of our responsibilities. Again, I would like to thank the witnesses for coming today, taking your time out, but also the part that you play in protecting our national security. I look forward to hearing your testimony and working together with each and every one of you to make sure that our nation's safe against any cyber attacks. Thank you.
Gentleman yields back. I'd like to introduce the ranking member of the NSA Cyber Committee, Mr. Himes, for an opening statement.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for coming and participating in this open hearing on a really important topic. I've had a chance to review the written testimony, and I know that we're going to hear quite a lot about the risks, the costs, and the players associated with cyber attacks on our country, these attacks that we all too often see on the front pages of the newspaper. We should do all we can, and I think the chairman and the ranking member have laid out a whole variety of things that we should be doing. What I don't hear, and what I want to spend just a couple of minutes on this morning, because I think it's really critical, essential, that we commit ourselves as a country to force and lead the establishment of some rules of the road internationally on how warfare is, and crime, frankly, is conducted in the cyber realm. We don't know today what constitutes an act of war. We don't know what an appropriate response is. We don't know where the line is drawn between crime and warfare. This is something we should be leading on. Something that perhaps is analogous to the Geneva Accords, which have existed for almost 150 years now and worked on internationally for 150 years. There is currently no comparable effort to set something like that treaty up so that we all understand the rules of the road. Admiral Rogers, we had a brief exchange on this in an open hearing a couple of months ago, and you assured me that this was in fact something that was on all of your minds. But I just don't see much, and I don't hear much. Well, why is this important? Again, the questions don't have ready answers. Is stealing classified information from us an act of war? Or is it just an act of espionage that we do to each other, and maybe we even grudgingly admire those who can pull off that kind of espionage? But what about if that espionage leads to the death of a source, or the death of 100 sources? What if that espionage leads to the death of Americans? At what point does it become an act of war that is responded to in the cyber realm? At what point is it an act of war that is responded to outside of the cyber realm? I don't know that we know the answers to this question. There's another important reason to take this up, which is that this is something that I think we can achieve. Our global geostrategic foes, whether you're thinking of the Iranians, the Chinese, the North Koreans, or the Russians, they have a common interest in us, with us, in understanding what the rules are and how we might react and how perhaps they should react in a variety of different situations. If we do this, we will also isolate non-state actors, and this is a realm, a lot of today is going to focus on asymmetry. This is a realm in which I suspect asymmetry is particularly a challenge for us. My guess is that 5 motivated coding PhDs in a basement somewhere can create a real threat for us. I also fear that if we don't do this, we will be on a continual technological treadmill, and I think we'll always be a little bit ahead on that treadmill, but we will always be looking over our shoulder as others develop the technological and engineering capability to get through our defenses. Doing this successfully, I don't think, results in this problem going away any more than the Geneva Convention eliminated war. But I think if you look at the 150 years of the Geneva Convention, it has done some really essential things for the world collectively. So I think it's up to us as members of Congress to push this, but I would just ask that we discuss it some today, that you give your thoughts and perhaps an update on whether we're making any progress in this area, and that as leaders in the intelligence community, you would prioritize an effort that I think could make a real difference. Thank you. I yield back the balance of my time.
I thank the gentleman. Well, Director Clapper, I said some really nice things about you right before you walked in, so you have to watch the replay on C-SPAN over the weekend to see those nice comments. But it is really a pleasure and an honor to have you and your team here to testify in public before this committee. We have your statement for the record, but we'd like to give you the opportunity to express what is in your statement that you provided to the committee. You're recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Chairman Nunes, Ranking Member Schiff, members of the committee. When I testified here on the Intelligence Committee's Worldwide Threat Assessment at the end of February, cyber threats again led our annual threat report, and this was the third year in a row we've done so. My colleagues and I are here today to update you on some of the cyber threats that face our nation and their attendant national security implications, much of which you've already discussed. We will, as you understand, run into some classified aspects that we won't be able to discuss as fully in this open televised hearing. I do want to take note of and thank the members of the committee who are engaged on this issue and have spoken to it publicly, as you did here this morning. So in the interest of time and allow for questions, this will be the only formal opening statement, and then we'll open it up for your questions. So I'll briefly cover some wage.
And Director Clapper, I didn't realize, but I think we were going to give you 10 minutes, so don't feel like you're on the clock here. But
All right, thanks, sir. I think we should be able to get this done within the 10 minutes. And my colleagues and I will be, as I said, open for your questions. So before I begin, I do want to note, and I guess forgive the commercial, but the events of the last few months have reinforced my belief in the need for a Cyber Threat Intelligence Integration Center, or CTIC, as we've come to call it, and I'll speak more to this later in my remarks. Cyber threats to U.S. national and economic security are increasing in frequency, scale, sophistication, and the severity of impact. And although we must be prepared for a large Armageddon scaled strike that would debilitate the entire U.S. infrastructure, that is not, it's not our belief that that's the most likely scenario. Rather, our primary concern are the low to moderate level cyber attacks from a variety of sources which will continue and probably expand. This imposes increasing costs, as you indicate, to our businesses, to U.S. economic competitiveness, and to national security. Because of our heavy dependence on the internet, nearly all information communications technology and IT networks and systems will be perpetually at risk. These weaknesses provide an array of possibilities for nefarious activity by cyber threat actors, including remote hacking intrusions, supply chain operations to insert compromised hardware or software, malicious actions by insiders, and simple human mistakes by system users. These cyber threats come from a range of actors, including nation states, which fall into, at least in my mind, two broad categories. Those with highly sophisticated cyber programs, most notably Russia and China. Those with lesser technical capabilities, but more nefarious intent, such as Iran or North Korea, who are also more aggressive and more unpredictable. With respect to non-nation state entities, criminals motivated by profit, hackers or extremists motivated by ideology, all are, of course, included in this threat. Profit-motivated cyber criminals rely on loosely networked online marketplaces, often referred to as the cyber underground or dark web, that provide a forum for the merchandising of illicit tools, services, and infrastructure, and stolen personal information and financial data. The most significant financial cyber criminal threats to U.S. entities and our international partners come from a relatively small subset of actors, facilitators, and criminal fora. Terrorist groups will continue to experiment with hacking, which could serve as the foundation for developing more advanced capabilities. With respect to the impacts, again, you've alluded to this already, cyber espionage undermines confidentiality. Cyber threats and actors, particularly criminal and terrorist entities, undermine data confidentiality. Denial of service operations and data deletion attacks undermine availability. In the future, I believe we'll see more cyber operations that will change or manipulate electronic information to compromise its integrity. In other words, compromise its accuracy and its reliability, instead of merely deleting it or disrupting access to it. With respect to counterintelligence impacts, as illustrated so dramatically with the OPM breaches, counterintelligence risks are inherent when foreign intelligence agencies obtain access to an individual's identity information. Foreign intelligence agencies could target the individual, family members, coworkers, and neighbors using a variety of physical and electronic methods for extortion or recruiting purposes. And while speaking of the OPM breaches, let me say a couple words about attribution, which is not a simple process and involves at least three related but distinct determinations: the geographic point of origin, the identity of the actual perpetrator doing the keystrokes, and the responsibility for actually directing the attack. In the case of OPM, we've had differing degrees of confidence across the IC in our assessment of responsibility for each of these elements. Of late, unauthorized disclosures and foreign defensive improvements have cost us some technical accesses. But from cybersecurity investigations of incidents caused by foreign actors, we are also deriving valuable new insight and new means of aggregating and processing big data. In summary, the cyber threats to U.S. national and economic security have become increasingly diverse, sophisticated, and harmful. The variety of federal entities that work this cyber problem, some of which are represented here with me: DHS, FBI, and NSA, and other law enforcement, intelligence, and sector-specific agencies like the Departments of Treasury and Energy. And every day, each of these centers and entities gets better and better at what they're charged to do individually. So now we've reached the point where we believe it's time to knit together all the intelligence these separate activities need to defend our networks, because while these entities may be defending different networks, they are often defending against the same threats. And that was one reason the President directed me to form a CTIC. So I strongly believe that the time has come for the creation of such an organization, and we're pleased to see that you've shown support for the new center in both your cyber and FY16 authorization bills. We look forward to working with the committee to enable the intelligence community in general, and CTIC in particular, to support our nation in this vital area. With that, I'll stop, and we'll open up for your questions.
Well, Director, thank you very much. And as you know, we are anxiously awaiting on the Senate to pass the cyber legislation so that we can get to a conference. We were hopeful that they would get done before we broke for August. They haven't. Now it looks like, just in recent reading, it looks like we're looking now into October. I want to give all of you just a broad question and give you plenty of time to answer it. But being that we're out here in the public for everyone to see, I think it's a great time to not only discuss, what each of your agencies do, but also talk about maybe the number 1, 2, and 3, maybe not in any particular order, particular to your agency, what you see as the greatest threats, biggest concerns, and the issues that you all are working on in each of your individual agencies. And we'll start with you, Director Clapper.
Well, sir, from Chairman News, from my standpoint, obviously I'm trying to overwatch the entire enterprise of U.S. intelligence. And as I have said every year that I've testified for now 5 years in this job, that in my 50-plus years in the intelligence business, I don't recall a time when we've been beset by a greater variety of challenges and crises around the world, both regionally and functionally. And so the challenge for me is, as I try lead the community, is addressing this wide diversity of threats. In the face of, and I have to bring this up, a very uncertain budgeting environment, now approaching our 4th or 5th year of uncertainty about the size and shape of our budget, which poses challenge for us programmatically, certainly with respect to systems acquisition and the uncertainty it creates in the workforce. So with that, I'll stop there, that general overview, and I'll turn first to John Brennan.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the committee, for the opportunity to talk to you today about this very important issue. 3 top priorities for me, thinking about cyber. One is, since CIA has a responsibility to make sure that we have a good grasp of what the plans, intentions, and capabilities are of our adversaries around the world, making sure that we have the insight and the intelligence that will give us better sense of what may be coming at us. So that's part of our mission. But given that this is a very dynamic environment in terms of what the various tools and capabilities that various actors have, we need to make sure that we're on the top of our game in order to make sure we inform our policymakers, legislators, and others. Two, want to make sure that our systems are going to be as secure as they can be, so that we can fulfill our responsibilities to share information as we need to, make sure that people who are going to be able to operate and act on the information that we are able to get, both inside of the CIA and outside, that we can do that securely and reliably. And so we have initiated a number of actions within the agency to make sure that, in light of some recent experiences, that we are in some respects doubling down on the security in that regard. And I rely very heavily on my colleagues here on that front. And then third, since CIA is supposed to be operating securely, clandestinely, and covertly, globally, we need to make sure that we have a full appreciation of what that digital domain, that cyber environment, has in terms of both challenges and opportunities, which is one of the reasons why we in CIA have set up, for the first time in over 50 years, a new directorate on digital innovation, so that we are able to bring together the expertise and develop the capabilities that we need in order to carry out our missions, so that we know what we are dealing with when we try to fulfill our responsibilities around the world in an increasingly digitized environment, and the various digital dust that we all pick up every day in our lives. So we need to be mindful of how that is going to impact our intelligence activities and operations.
Mike?
From an NSA perspective, first in terms of what our mission and responsibilities are, we use our foreign intelligence mission to generate insights as to what cyber actors, nation states, groups, individuals are doing in the cyber arena, with a view towards ensuring that we have insights as to their efforts against the United States, our allies, and their interests. Also, importantly, from an NSA perspective, in our information assurance role, we are responsible for developing the cryptographic standards for all classified systems within the Department of Defense. We also apply our technical capabilities, partnering with others within the DoD to generate the technical standards to help ensure the security of all of our classified systems within the department. And then we apply our information assurance expertise more broadly, partnering with the FBI and DHS, both to support more broadly within the federal government and also within the private sector. So those are our roles. In terms of what concerns me, priority number one clearly is ensuring the defense of our own networks to ensure we're able to execute our operations in a secure manner. Also ensuring helping to partner with others to ensure the defense of the DoD and more broadly the .gov domains. When I look at it from a threat perspective, I would argue three things really as I focus in the future. Efforts aimed against U.S. critical infrastructure. Well, the second item to me is, are we going to see a shift in a trend from not just outright theft of information, but are we going to start to see a focus on manipulation or changing of data once someone is able to gain access to a system? So we start to question the validity of what we all are particularly looking at. And then finally, in the counterterrorism arena, do we start to see groups start to view the web as a weapon system and not just a way to dispense ideology, recruit, raise money? They decide they want to take it to another level, and we clearly already see very open and public conversations about that now.
Director Comey?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Schiff, for having me here today. The FBI's mission is in the United States to detect and respond to all the threats that come at us through the internet, through cyberspace, which is increasingly every threat we're responsible for, whether that's counterterrorism, counterintelligence, or all the many criminal threats that we focus on. At the top of our threat stack when it comes to cyber are the nation-state actors, both their intelligence activities in the United States and their theft activities in the United States to steal our innovation, our ideas, our energy. And in responding to that, my primary concerns are making sure that we have the folks, we have the equipment they need, and we have the deployment that makes sense to respond to that threat.
General Stewart?
In DIA, our primary responsibility is to understand the military capabilities of our adversary. So in this space, we're particularly interested in how an adversary uses the digital environment to command and control forces, conduct ISR, so that we can counter his capabilities in this space. So we're focused not just in the non-kinetic capabilities that we could bring against an adversary's C4 ISR capabilities, but also the kinetic. So we're looking at this from a broad spectrum, either how we drop bombs to destroy or defeat that capability, or how we can be disruptive in that capability. We provide that through all source analysis based on products and support that we get from our partners here at this table. Two concerns for us: how well we defend our networks. We're spending a good bit of time looking at the construct of our architecture so we can defend not just the network, but the data within that network. And then the second area of concern is whether or not I have enough resources and expertise to do the first part of our charge in this space, understanding our adversaries' C4ISR capabilities. And that's an area that we've got to do some additional investment. We've got to move some resources around. Given the totality of the things that we've got to look at, the threat landscape, this is an area where I think we need to do some additional investments.
Well, I thank you all for being here. At this time, I'll yield to the ranking member for the purpose of questioning.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, gentlemen. I have two questions, one dealing with the encryption issue and the other dealing with our response to cyber attacks and intrusions. On the encryption issue, there are several issues. There's the technological question of can we or can Silicon Valley design a technological solution? There's the desirability question. Even if they could, is it desirable? Do we gain more from having encrypted communications immune from cyber hacking than we lose in law enforcement and IC's ability to get the content of communications? So what's the desirability of a solution if we could achieve it technologically? And then there's the economic argument. These companies have to compete overseas. There are others that are offering an encrypted platform that people will migrate to. So what do we achieve apart from harming our economic interests by insisting on a key? So I wonder if you could address those arguments that we hear from industry about this. How do you evaluate it? And on the technological issue, 20 years ago, the National Academy of Sciences did an analysis of a related encryption issue and the Clipper chip, and came up with a neutral and thoughtful analysis. Would it be worthwhile to have them take a look at this question? Is there somewhere we can go for an objective answer to the technological question that is held distinct from the economic interests at stake? Is it worthwhile pursuing that kind of a neutral analysis? So I'd be interested in your comments on the technological feasibility, desirability, and economic implications of the encryption debate. And then on the cyber front, it seems to me that there are two very different kinds of cyber issues we're confronting. There are the cyber attacks, well, actually, I guess three. There's cyber attacks like Sony, meant to do damage. Cyber threats to our infrastructure would be in that category. There are cyber theft, so economic espionage for the purpose of benefiting foreign corporations. And then there are foreign intelligence gathering efforts. And it seems to me that for many of our adversaries in this realm, like the Chinese, there's an advantage to blurring the distinctions between these. Because if they can blur the distinction between economic theft and foreign intelligence gathering, then they can justify anything they do. And it seems to me it's in our interest to draw clear lines between foreign intelligence gathering and economic theft. And yet when I hear the discussion, sometimes involving OPM and sometimes involving other things, I hear us in the IC blurring those lines. So I wish you could address that. Shouldn't we make clear what the rules of the road are, that we don't engage in economic espionage, and we want to insist that others also don't engage in that kind of theft, and think about whether there are any rules of the road in terms of foreign intelligence gathering, but keep those questions distinct. You could comment on those two issues.
So let me, I think I'll turn for those two questions to two of our panel, and I'll start with Director Comey and then Admiral Rogers.
So I'll offer a reaction on the encryption question. Right. Thank you, Mr. Schiff. First of all, I very much appreciate the feedback from the companies. We've been trying to engage, excuse me, in dialogue with companies, because this is not a problem that's going to be solved by the government alone. It's going to require industry, academia, associations of all kinds, and the government. I hope we can start from a place where we all agree there's a problem and that we share the same values around that problem. When I hear people talk about the crypto wars, it throws me because wars are fought between people with different values. I think we all share the same values here. We all care about safety and security on the internet, right? I'm a big fan of strong encryption. We all care about public safety. And the problem we have here is those are in tension in a whole lot of our work, increasingly in counterterrorism and criminal work and counterintelligence work. And given that we care about the same things, I hope we can all agree that we ought to come together to try and solve that problem. I've heard from a lot of folks that it's too hard, and my reaction to that is, really? Have we really tried? Have we really tried? When I look at industry today, I see companies, I'm not going to name them here, but major internet service providers who are able to comply with court orders because they strongly encrypt in transit and they decrypt when it crosses their networks so they can read our emails, so they can send us ads. I've never heard anybody say those companies are fundamentally insecure and fatally flawed from a security perspective. So I don't think we've really tried, and also don't think there's an it to the solution. I would imagine there might be many, many solutions depending upon whether you're an enormous company that's in this business or a tiny company in that business. I just think we haven't given it the shot that it deserves, which is why I welcome the dialogue, and we're having some very healthy discussions.
And with respect to the second part of your question, sir, I mean, I think you've correctly characterized there is no one-size-fits-all to describe the spectrum of activity that we see out there. I think that's one reason why you see response to different events are not always the same. We try to look at each event in its own context. Sony clearly, for example, in the first category, as you've suggested, an offensive act designed to create damage, versus much activity we see, which is clearly designed nation states attempting to gain economic advantage, whether that's for competitive purposes or attempting to steal insights that they can in turn generate and use themselves to develop capabilities that are of interest to them. The theft of information, I think it's one reason why to date we've tried to be somewhat nuanced, if you will, in how we as a government have responded. I think it also goes to the comments in some of your opening statements about the long-term end state I think we have to get to here is this idea of acceptable norms of behavior and what's within reason and what is not within reason. And we clearly understand nation states use the spectrum of capabilities they have to attempt to generate insights in the world around them. But that does not mean that the use of cyber for manipulative, destructive purposes is acceptable. That does not mean that the use of cyber for the extraction of massive amounts of personally identifiable information is acceptable. And we're going to have to work our way through how do we develop all that in a much more refined way than we have to date.
I have to say, sir, that, of course, many of these issues that you raise are significant and are also policy issues, not really the realm of the group of people sitting here. We can try to speak to them, but I do feel compelled to make that point. And on your concern about conflating or not distinguishing between cyber threats for economic purposes or for foreign intelligence, you're quite right. It's not that we don't make that distinction, but the adversaries, notably the Chinese, do not. They don't see a difference at all in the ultimate purpose for which they extract data from us. So I just want to, kind of make that distinction. I also, and this is a personal view, with respect to that which is conducted for espionage purposes, I just would caution that we think in the old saw about people live in glass houses. We should think before we throw rocks. So these are very, as you correctly and appropriately allude, very complex policy issues.
If I could just drill down once more on both very narrowly. On the latter issue, are there any rules in the road when it comes to foreign intelligence gathering? Or is it futile to even try to develop them because if a nation decides it's in their national security interest, they're going to do what they're going to do? Or should we try to establish some rules of the road for foreign intelligence gathering? And on the first point, if Director Comey, you could just give your thoughts on what you make of the economic arguments that other companies are going to do this. There's an advantage to having healthy American companies in this area, both from an economic and a national security point of view. Aren't we at risk of losing that?
Jim, go ahead, and I'll answer the other.
So I think it's a reasonable concern. I have two reactions to it. First, I think it's incumbent upon us as a country to decide how do we want to govern ourselves and our affairs. What's the right thing for America? There are lots of costs that come with being an American business, right? You're not allowed to employ children. You can't pollute the environment, right? We impose all kinds of rules on people that other countries don't, which is a disadvantage to our companies. But we've decided we want to be a certain way. So I think we ought to start there. But look, I'm not blind to the fact they have to compete in an international marketplace with other countries that share our values. So I got to imagine an important part of this is going to be an international set of norms where countries that care about those same things, safety on the internet and public safety, come together and establish this is how we will act, right? For example, I can imagine us saying, if there is a neutral and detached magistrate that has found a basis, right, under the law for this information, then it can be obtained and the company must find a way to provide it. That's the way the rule of law that governs our allies around the world is, and I think that would be an important part of any agreement that resolves this. And I hear from our allies all the time. The French want the same thing, the Germans, the British. So I think that is something that could be done.
So I would just comment that on the rules of the road issue, that I think it's fair to say the United States has more rules governing the conduct of foreign intelligence than any other nation on the planet, exemplified by PB 28, which of course governs particularly the conduct of signal intelligence in this country, and to some extent extends civil liberties and privacy protections to foreign citizens. I don't believe any other country does that. So we do have an elaborate set of governance tenets that influence the conduct of intelligence in general and signal intelligence specifically. Don't see too many other partners that would similarly align with us.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So if I may, Admiral Rogers, anything you want to add?
The only other comment I would make is, in many other areas, we have been able over time to develop a set of norms about what is sense of what is acceptable, what is not acceptable. And I think over time we'll do the same thing in this environment, but we clearly are not there yet. And I would just reinforce the DNI's comment about there are very specific things that I find foreign intelligence organizations doing in the cyber domain that, quite frankly, are illegal for us that we cannot do. I mean, it's a very different set of rules out there in many ways between us and the activities I see others engage in.
Gentleman yields back. Yield 5 minutes to the gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Westmoreland.
Thank you, Chairman. We passed a good cyber bill, I think, out of the House that allowed businesses to share information without the liability question. And as Adam mentioned that, you know, we hear about attacks and then we hear about intrusions. When does playing defense become offense? In other words, if some of these companies have picked out a marker, we have determined where it is coming from. Do we continually play defense with that or try to come up with a better defense? Or is some action that we might take going to be considered offensive to whether it's a nation state or you know, another company or whatever? Where is that line at?
So for us, particularly on the DoD side, I'm pretty comfortable that we've got a fairly well understood characterization of what is defensive in nature in terms of actions and response. The bigger challenge in some ways is there is still uncertainty about how would you characterize what is offensive and what is authorized. Again, that boils down ultimately to a policy decision. And to date, we have tended to do that on a case-by-case basis. In terms of your fundamental premise, I think importantly, and a comment that I certainly make when I'm part of the discussions, a purely reactive defensive strategy is not ultimately, I think, going to change the dynamic where we are now. And the dynamic we find ourselves in now, I don't think is acceptable to anyone.
Well, when you say it's a policy issue, are we talking about a policy issue that comes out of the White House?
So the application of cyber in an offensive way is an application of force. The application of force under the law of armed conflict in the broader policy construct that we use as nations, once you move beyond self-defense, is a decision that is made at a broad policy level. It's not something I, for example, as the director of NSA or as the commander of U.S. Cyber Command, just unilaterally decide. That's not the framework. Again, not unique to the cyber world. It's the same fundamental construct we use for the application of force in the kinetic world within the Department of Defense and more broadly in other areas.
So how is that sifted out? I mean, who makes that determination?
So it depends on a case-by-case basis, but clearly the Secretary of Defense has granted some authorities, the President retains some authorities at his level, and that's all part of the process that we work through, and we deal with each individual event on the merits of its own.
Well, you understand that when the public hears the word attack, it gives off a little different meaning than if we say intrusion.
Right, which is one reason I think you also raise an important point. Terminology and lexicon is very important in this space. And many times I'll hear people throw out attack, act of war, and I go, that's not necessarily in every case how I would characterize the activity that I see.
So that is a good distinction to make, and just using the OPM breach as a case in point, that really, although it's been characterized by some loosely as an attack, it really wasn't, since it was entirely passive, and it didn't result in destruction or any of those kinds of effects. So that the distinction you point out, and thank you for doing that, is quite important. And as Admiral Rogers says, the lexicon, the terminology is crucial.
If a company or they discover that they're being attacked by a certain entity or whatever, and they use a means to stop that attack. In other words, they can figure out how to stop that attack. Can they do that offensively, I guess? And what would differentiate between an offensive move and a defensive move?
First of all, there's a clear line in the United States, right? It would be a crime for any private actor to engage in an offensive cyber operation, to penetrate without permission the computer system of another. That's a statute that this Congress has passed. I think, so that's a clear line. I think it also makes good sense to those of us in the intelligence community that we don't want self-help because of the nature of the cyberspace is that there are unforeseen consequences that are could be dramatic and unforeseen.
I think, getting back to the definition, I think that's what we're looking for, is a definition of what is offensive and what's defensive. But thank you very much, and I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentlelady from Alabama, Ms. Sewell.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I want to thank all you gentlemen for your service to this nation, for all the important work that you're doing in your various agencies. I wanted to drill a little bit deeper into the question that Congressman Westmoreland raised. Director Clapper, you suggested that the OPM information that was stolen wasn't used for any nefarious activities to our knowledge right now. Wanted to know what your thoughts were about how the information that was stolen from OPM or from Anthem is being used by these cyber actors.
Well, what we've done is speculate how it could be used. And again, the distinction I was just making with Congressman Westmoreland had to do with the terminology of saying that the OPM breach was an attack. And I don't, again, getting back to the definitional issue, we wouldn't characterize it that way. What's of great concern with respect to the OPM breach, which I spoke to briefly in my opening statement, had to do with potential uses of that data. And of course, we're looking thus far, we haven't seen any evidence of their usage of that data. And certainly, we're going to be looking for it. But it's of great concern to the employees who are potentially affected, and as well as their families and coworkers, in terms of how it could be used in a very damaging way, not only institutionally in terms of, particularly for intelligence people, but in general, how this could be used to inflict financial damage, for example.
How does the various agencies work in a coordinated effort with respect to cyber attacks? Can you talk a little bit about how the...
If you're talking about the intelligence agencies?
Yes.
Well, we are very, very mindful of that, obviously. I mean, this is a case where we probably need to set the highest standard and example. And so I know in my own place, I have very intensive effort on securing and ensuring that our networks, simply in my own headquarters, are secure. And I know my colleagues are doing the same. Let me ask Admiral Rogers to comment as well.
And I think Jim Comey may have a perspective as well. I think first question is, so which is the domain that is receiving this intrusion? Is it within the .mil? Is it within the .gov? Is it in .com, .edu in the private sector? Let's take this.
Isn't it a coordinated effort, though? I mean,
Oh, it is. So,
I know that it may start in one particular agency which has jurisdictions, but I would assume that it is coordinated across all of our systems.
It is, but my point is the coordination, who has lead, the primacy, it varies by the, if you will, the entity that is being penetrated, where it is, in the government, outside the government. If we use the .gov domain as an example, the Department of Homeland Security has overall responsibility for the coordination of the defense of the .gov domain, each department responsible for protection of their own systems, DHS overall responsibility in the .gov domain. So if you look in the OPM scenario, for example, you saw OPM as they began to realize what had happened is they realized this was beyond their own capacity. They turned to DHS in turn then turned to the FBI and NSA to provide technical support. We do that continually. We've done that particularly between NSA and the FBI. Within the government domain, increasingly we find ourselves, when requested, attempting to support high-end intrusions in the private sector. Sony is an example, for example.
Is there anything that could be done to enhance that cooperation and coordination?
There's always more. I mean, from my perspective, as I talk to my teammates, speed is critical here. Focus, leadership buy-in, the ability to set up mechanisms to more rapidly flow information back and forth with each other, the ability to put expertise more quickly on the problem set. We continually get better, but for me at least, and part of it is the...
Obviously, one area that, of course, we could improve is in the government to private sector relationship. That's why the legislation is so important. Let me ask Director Comey as well if he has a comment.
I agree with what Admiral Rogers said. We've made dramatic strides in the last 5 years. I think of us, this is probably a homely metaphor, but we're kind of like a fire station. When the bell rings, we send all the trucks. Right? We don't ask, do they need a hook and ladder? Do they need a rescue truck? Do they need an ambulance truck? We send them all, and that means we send NSA, FBI, DHS. We talk to each other and figure out what's needed at the scene to help these people who call 911.
Yeah.
That has gotten dramatically better. Our primary way of sharing information is through the NCI-JTF, which I hope you've had a chance to visit. We all sit together, and in human terms and electronically, we share that information about what do we need to respond to this particular fire.
Well, in my remaining time, I wanted to commend Director Brennan on your tackling the persistent problem of lack of diversity in the IC. I know that you commissioned a report, and I just wanted to commend you on seeing the need, and look forward to working with all of the agencies represented in making sure that we address our lack of diversity in the intelligence community. I yield back to you.
Gentlelady yields back. Gentleman from Florida, Mr. Miller,
Thank you, Mr.
recognized.
Chairman. Somebody said that Iran did not have the technical capabilities that a Russia or a China would have. Is it safe to assume, and I use that word assume in quotes, that Russia would give some of their capabilities to Iran to use it in the cyber world?
Sir, that might be best left to a closed discussion.
Somebody talked about attribution also. How do we distinguish between a state-sponsored hack or attack and an individual?
Jim, you want to try that?
The way we do in almost any other circumstance, we try and see what facts we have to connect the individual at the keyboard to a particular government. Sometimes it's direct evidence, sometimes it's circumstantial, sometimes it's the tools used. We put together those facts and say, what judgment can we make to attribute? There's always a human being at the keyboard, that human being to a particular state actor.
And the only other comment I would make is, and then we'll compare the activity that we've observed with that which we have observed historically over time, looking for similarities, other connections we've previously been able to determine.
Are most of the attacks designed to glean information or to disrupt?
Well, again, the terminology attack versus gleaning information, and to this point, it's either been, disruption of a website, for example, but more commonly just purloining information. As I indicated in my opening statement, though, I believe that the next push on the envelope here is going to be the manipulation or deletion of data, which will, of course, compromise its integrity.
Going back to the Russia-Iran issue, and I know going back to Russia and Iran, and I know there's some issues that we can't talk about here, but Russia's setting up a cyber command. How about China?
To the best of my knowledge, the Chinese have not yet gone to a configuration like the Russians appear to have with establishing a cybercom somewhat analogous to Admiral Rogers' command. But that's not to say that the Chinese, as you know, have very capable structure and apparatus in their current PLA staff structure.
You back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Quigley is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Gentlemen, thank you for being here and thank you for your service. I guess we hear most often of the high-profile hacks, cyber attacks on the U.S. government and major corporations. But as you know, the majority of businesses in the United States are small business. And we have thousands of very small local governments. They still contain in their computers extraordinarily sensitive client information or public information. Yet, as we can imagine, they often lack the sophistication, the capabilities, the expertise, the knowledge, the resources to meet this challenge. What, if anything, are we doing to reach out to those entities and try to help them meet this challenge?
It is absolutely a concern of every business in the United States, from the traditional mom and pop up to medium-sized to large. And so we have, what the FBI is doing about it is we recognize that that's a threat to everybody because our whole lives are connected to the internet. So in every community in this country, we have something called InfraGuard, which is designed to offer a vehicle for those folks to learn from us best practices and warnings and indicators, and for them to be able to share information that's useful to other small businesses and to the FBI. So I'd encourage small business folks, contact your local FBI office. We're in every community in this country. Right? We have over 500 offices. Join InfraGuard. It will make you smarter, and I hope in the process it'll make your government smarter.
I would just add as well the responsibility, and they're not, only because they're not represented here today, is the Department of Homeland Security, which does have a responsibility for engaging at state, local, tribal, and private sector segment.
And I appreciate that, but the lack of resources, we hear so often that it's becoming cheaper and easier to hack and more expensive and difficult to defend. Is there some other way besides this that we should begin to look at in terms of trying to balance the field between the resources a community bank has versus a major national bank? Just as one example.
One of the things that we need to continue to do better as a federal government is equip our state and local partners, right, to investigate crimes that are digital in nature. And that's something that sheriffs and chiefs are hungry for. The FBI and the Secret Service are pushing out lots of training, pushing it out online, so people from their desk in a police station have become a certified cyber investigator. The reason that matters so much is there's never going to be enough federal agents to answer the calls, to answer the bell of tens and tens of thousands of small businesses who need help. And so we've got to equip our local partners to be able to offer that assistance.
Thank you so much, and I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Now yield to the Chairman of the Agriculture Committee, Mr. Conaway.
Thanks, Chairman. Director Clapper, you mentioned the dark web in your comments, and that maybe Mr. Rogers may be a better answer, but could you give us a better description of what that means and how it's being used? And can you tell if information that's been purloined from somewhere else is actually being sold in that arena?
Jim, the dark web.
The dark web is that portion of the internet that is not touched by any of your normal search engines. So you won't find it through Google or Yahoo or Bing or anything like that. You have to go looking for it. And so it requires specialized knowledge, and often to operate there requires specialized software. Because it is not reachable and it is hidden, sort of a below level, below the waterline, it's attractive to people who want to avoid any kind of scrutiny. So it's very attractive to criminals of all sorts.
So have you seen it actually being used to sell information that's been stolen elsewhere?
Oh, certainly. We just took down a forum in the dark web that was being used to trade information, personally identifiable information, and skills. What the hackers have done is that hacking has become so sophisticated, it's become specialized now. So no one does all the different pieces that are necessary to steal your identity and then cash it out. And so it is on those places in the dark web that they meet each other. And as someone who specializes in cashing out can talk to someone who specializes in stealing, and someone else who has a specialty in hiding things on a particular server can sell their services there. So it is a world full of criminals, which is why investigators for the FBI and our partners spend a whole lot of time there.
So do you have the right tools or the right, I mean, is any of that activity that should be criminal that's not criminal yet? Are there areas where we need to improve what you can do in that arena?
I think by and large we have the tools, Congressman, and what we're trying to do is, with our international partners, that's the key. Because just finding the bad guys from the United States doesn't help us if the bad guys are all around the world. So the operation I just mentioned involved 20 countries simultaneously locking these guys up. So we send a message that you think you're hiding from us, but you're not hiding from us. The dark web is not a safe place to conduct criminal activity. So I think we have the tools in the FBI to get in there and find them, and what we're getting better at is building those international relationships.
Do you have the requisite authorities to do what you need?
I believe we do, yes, sir.
Without getting into details, can you assure us that whether it's a breach or an intrusion or an attack at OPM, that at this stage you reverse engineered what happened well enough to try to begin to put in place appropriate protections elsewhere in the .gov world?
I don't think that's something I'm best to speak about.
For NSA, we provided OPM with 19 specific recommendations on how we would suggest changes to the network structure would help forestall future such activity. DHS, in addition, has identified recommended improvements. I know OPM is working their way through that and has a plan for how they're going to implement the steps they believe are necessary to ensure that they don't see a repeat.
It's not your lane, but they can't be the only ones who had the problem. Is it that information, those recommendations being shared beyond just OPM?
Yes, so part of what we try to do, and it really goes to Representative Sewell's point, every time we find ourselves with a major incident, we try to ensure that the insights we generate from that are shared more broadly, both across the government with our private sector partners, because we're the first to acknowledge it's likely others will attempt to replicate the same kind of TTPs, as we would say, the same techniques they're using again. So we try to make sure we share information broadly.
General Clapper, is there authority anywhere for someone to require all these government agencies, OPM, others, to actually implement the recommendations or to set standards and then hold agency executives, secretaries of the various cabinet folks? Is there somebody who can say you have to do this by a certain period of time?
I can't quote you a chapter and verse, maybe others here can, but I think it just from a simple standpoint of institutional responsibility for
I know that.
attending to their networks.
Yeah, they all work for the president, but it's a little, you know, you wouldn't expect him to call down and make sure it happens. Is there someone in the hierarchy of folks who work close enough to the president that that can actually be required to happen?
Mike, can you help me with that? If there's a
I mean, in the aftermath of OPM, more broadly across the federal government, the White House set up a task force that specifically designated a series of concrete steps that were required to be executed. My memory is we had to finish it all within a 90-day time frame, every department across the government. But as the DNI has indicated, I always try to remind people, in the end, this is all about accountability and leadership, and how you prioritize in a tough environment where you're competing for limited resources. You've got 1,000 challenges you're trying to deal with as a leader, trying to ensure that you're sending a strong message to your organization, your subordinates, about what your expectations are and what's acceptable and what's not acceptable, and fundamental lapses in your ability to protect information that our citizens have shared with us from a government.
I think
government
if
doesn't
you want to point to an institution in the government that has that responsibility for the government-wide, is probably the Office of Management and Budget, and of course, appropriately, they have the power of the purse.
Exactly. Thank you, gentleman. Yield back.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from California, Mr. Swalwell.
Thank you, Chair, and I want to thank the panelists and the IC for your work this summer. We took down some planned ISIL attacks in America. It was cooperation in the community, and the FBI made some very helpful arrests. And that highlights, I think, that we have to be perfect. They pull off one attack, and it hurts people, and it caused panic. So thank you for doing that. I want to follow up a little bit on what Mr. Conaway was saying. My question's for Director Comey. As a former prosecutor, I appreciate how hard it is to go after, what we would kind of call like a paper case or a computer case. It takes a lot of work, and to figure out whose fingertips are on the keyboard causing these attacks is very difficult, especially when they're drawn across the globe. But do you think we could do a better job of making sure we hold these people responsible, show them to the world, and deter more attacks? Because right now it seems like we are almost entirely on a defensive posture, and I think you hinted that a lot of this is because of international challenges. We just struck an agreement with Iran that involved China and Russia and countries we don't normally agree with and work with. Do you foresee an opportunity for a compact with nations to go after some of the cyber criminals? The cyber espionage, I think, is different, but cyber criminals that would better assist you to do your job?
I do. I think the bad guys, through the use of the internet, have shrunk the world. Right? They've made places that are tens of hundreds, thousands of miles apart, next-door neighbors on the internet. So our strategy, the FBI strategy, is shrink the world back in two ways. Forward deploy FBI cyber agents around the world, and also equip our partners around the world with technology and training and people so they can help us. Because you're exactly right. The bad guys think it's a freebie, that they're in their pajamas at their keyboard halfway around the world. They can steal anything in America. What we're trying to do is make them look over their shoulder at, if they're in America, at an FBI agent, but if they're halfway around the world, at an agent from that country. And it's getting a lot better. I mean, countries around the world see this. It can always be better, though.
Thank you, Director. And with respect to what Ranking Member Schiff was talking about earlier on the end-to-end encryption and the challenges there, I certainly would hate if we didn't do everything we could to prevent the next attack and know where it's going to come from. And the challenge that you have laid out, I think, quite articulately over the past year about going dark, as you mentioned, it has tension with some of the security and privacy values that we also have. How do you see us reconciling that? And you mentioned making sure that we work with industry. It's not just policy, but back at home in the Bay Area, it sometimes seems like we've forgotten about September 11th, and privacy is a paramount concern. How can we reconcile the two as lawmakers and also with industry so that we don't look back and see that we could have prevented an attack, but we were dark?
I think from the government side, our responsibility is to talk to folks and explain to them we're not maniacs, right? The FBI is not an alien force imposed upon the American people, right? We work for the American people. We work with the tools that they give us through Congress. And so our job is to say, hey, look, our tools are being eroded, and we're not making it up. I mean, what has helped people, I think, in the ISIL threat is see that we're not making it up. I mean, there really is a conflict between two things we all care about deeply, and if we're going to protect people, we got to figure out how to resolve that. But also not be arrogant and think, well, the answer is from the government. You should not look to the government for innovation, right? We can do a lot of great things, but technological innovation is not our thing. So I think we got to start by saying we have a problem. We all love this great country of ours. We have to come together to try and solve it. And I say that to everybody who tells me it's too hard. I really believe we have not given this the shot that it deserves. And we're going to continue talking about it to try and demystify it and blow away this nonsense that we're at war with each other. This shouldn't be venom, right? We should all care about the same things and figure out how to solve it.
And Director, finally, if we were in a posture where if American companies, or if most of the end-to-end encryption that was being used by the bad guys ended up being overseas, or companies that were overseas, what is the plan to make sure we can still protect communications that would threaten America?
How we would reach
Sure.
infrastructure completely overseas,
Yeah.
we'd have to do it with our foreign partners. I mean, as I said, I think every civilized country, every country that cares about the rule of law thinks about this in the same way. All of us have to reconcile those two values. And we have to do it as an international community. We also just don't want to chase the problem to some place where we can't get to it. So we got to figure out our piece and also work with our international partners as a community of nations to figure out how to address this.
Great. Thank you, Director. And again, thank you all for the work you did this summer and continue to do. And I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Ms. Ross Layton in Florida. is
Thank you so
recognized for
much,
5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman. This morning, the Treasury Department targeted 4 key Hamas leaders as financial facilitators for their terrorist acts and sanctioned them. One was Saudi, one Palestinian, one Egyptian, one Jordanian, and as well as the front company that they used to transfer all of these dollars. And they were providing incredible financial support to individual terrorists as well as the groups they belong to. And this highlights the international scope of fundraising by these terrorist enterprise and the directing of military operations and facilitating of transfer of funds, all done within the cyber domain. Were it not for that, they would not be able to move this money around and plan these attacks. We're talking tens of millions of dollars that were moved from Iran to Saudi Arabia, a lot of money laundering. How confident are you in your individual agencies and working together that you have the necessary resources to continue to track these terrorist activities, that we'll be able to continue to sanction these individuals? They keep popping up. As soon as we put these 4 guys down and put them out of business, 4 more will pop up, but we're able to track them thanks to the technology that we have. So how confident are you that we can continue this? It's sort of like in the Coast Guard in my congressional district. They just have to get faster boats than the drug runners who are moving their drug shipment.
I think we have, thanks for the question, ma'am. I think we have a pretty good understanding of the financial mechanisms that are used. We could always do better and we could always use more resources, but we certainly have put focus on the whole issue of threat finances. That's a whole new realm of intelligence that has evolved over the last decade or so. I have a National Intelligence Manager for Threat Finance, who is also the Chief Intelligence Officer in the Department of Treasury. So we have very good linkage, I think, across the community, bringing to bear all the resources of the community, SIGINT, HUMINT, et cetera, to focus on this. But it is a constant challenge because, as you've, I think, implied in bringing this up, this is the lifeblood of international terrorist activity. John, do you have a comment?
I think we certainly have the tools. We're trying to make sure we utilize all of our various intelligence capabilities. But as Jim mentioned before, we have PPD 28, and there are issues related to access to metadata, bulk collection, other types of things that I think it gets into this issue about what can we do for security purposes, but what also might, in fact, impact on privacy, civil liberties issues. So the Treasury Department relies heavily on intelligence community to make sure that they have the sufficient basis to designate these individuals, and I think we, as Jim said, we're working very closely with them.
Is there something that we can do in terms of changing any laws that would allow you to do your job better in a way to bring down these terrorist organizations and the financial wherewithal?
Rather than respond off the tops of our head, why don't we take that for the record and give that some thought?
Thank you, sir. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
General yields back. Mr. Turner is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, thank you all for being here, and thank you for your diligence on an issue that is an incredibly important one. Not only is it an issue, as Director Clapper has said, of us losing information, but of the prospects that ultimately we could be looking at a change in the trend where, as Admiral Rogers was saying, either manipulation of data or actually damaging of data and effectiveness. But I want to ask two questions that relate to coordination. General Stewart, good to see you again. Last time you and I saw each other, you were at the National Air and Space Intelligence Center in my district at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Thank you for being there. My concern on the first question on the issue of coordination is with respect to ISIL. And following on Mr. Swalwell's question, you know, we have the director of the FBI, of course, who's trying to ensure that where we have ISIL, who's using social media to recruit individuals, that he find those individuals in the United States and thwart their opportunity or their planned attacks. But of course, obviously with DOD, their goal is to find these individuals and bring justice to them so we neutralize the threat as they continue to operate. ISIL's use of personnel, trying to target military personnel and also facilities through social media is of a concern, of course, across the country and in my own community at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base, even if public events have been canceled. But when it goes to bringing justice to that individual that's not in the United States, the director of FBI is not involved, the DOD is, and coordination is an issue, and I'd like, General, if you could speak a moment about the issue of the concern of our ability to bring justice to them and what our progress might be there. And the second issue is with respect to the Office of Personnel Management. Again, back to the National Air and Space Intelligence Center, I have of coordination of that you're all dependent upon OPM to protect the information of the people that allow your agencies to be effective and to function. General?
Congressman, the DIA enterprise extends not just here in Washington, but down to the combatant commands, to the service intelligence centers, and out to the forces that are on the ground in respective AOR. We coordinate daily on activities that we see across that entire spectrum of the enterprise. So we're in contact with the services, we're in contact with the combatant commands, we're in contact with our analysts here at our regional intel centers to make sure that we get the best characterization of the threat, best characterization of what they're capable of, and more importantly, if we can target them, how do we get that targeting data down to those forces that can, in a kinetic way, in a combat way, bring justice to these forces, to our adversary. And so I feel very comfortable that we're talking. So not only are we talking to those units below us, but we're also talking laterally. None of what I can do at DIA can be done without the efforts of NSA or the things that are being done at the CIA. So we bring all sources of information together, package that to all our consumers from the national level all the way down to our forces on the ground, and then we hopefully can bring that targetable information that will strike those actors in a very kinetic way.
And then Director Clapper, on the issue of also personal risk, it also includes the professional risk of the danger of this information being out. If you could speak to that for a moment, knowing that there's thousands of employees who are very concerned about that breach.
Well, that's quite right, sir. There is potentially, and I emphasize the word potentially, great risk. It's certainly in the case of intelligence people, particularly those assigned overseas, and in certain covered categories. That's a great concern of ours. What we have done through the auspices of the National Counterintelligence Security Center is to do as much education as we possibly can on what the potential implications are, both, as I said, institutionally and individually. But at this point, we haven't seen, as we discussed before, actual evidence of the use of any of this data in a nefarious way. I want to ask Director Comey to comment as well.
Yeah, I agree with Director Clapper's characterization. I worry with our workforce, it's been a little confusing that I have talked to my workforce about this, that we've got everybody credit monitoring. That's actually not my worry about this information. I feel like that's buying people flood insurance when their neighborhood just burned down. The fire is what I'm worried about. It's not people's credit cards and their credit rating, given what we think the information was taken for. We've seen no indication of it being used to hit anybody's credit rating or credit accounts. I don't think that's the concern. At the same time, I don't want to put people completely at ease because, as Director Clapper said, there's a significant counterintelligence threat that's associated with someone having this information, a nation state.
Gentleman's time has expired. Gentleman from Ohio, Dr. Winstrup.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you all for being here with us today. You know, we talk a lot about China, Russia, North Korea, Iran, non-state actors, and we're concerned with attacks and nesting and the dark web, et cetera. How much of what we're seeing is taking place from within the United States? Are we having bad actors within the United States that are participating in attacks and nesting and on the dark web?
Well, we have our fair share of criminals, and criminals increasingly operate online because that's where our lives are. Right? That's where children play, that's where we bank, that's where our health care is. And so people want to hurt kids, that's where they're operating. Then they're often sharing images with each other on the dark web, hoping that we won't be able to find it, that they'll use the onion router to hide their communications. As part of child exploitation, we see fraudsters of all kinds, whether it's healthcare or just trying to steal your banking transactions, trying to operate in a way that we can't see. And so they think if they go to the dark web, the hidden layers, so-called, of the internet, that they can hide from us. They're kidding themselves because of the effort that's been put in by all of us in the government over the last 5 years or so, that they are out of our view, but it's a big feature of criminal activity in the United States.
From a government standpoint and international relations and coming together and trying to combat cyber, do we have full confidence in working with the Five Eyes? Beyond that, where do you think we should go, or where are we going in that arena?
Well, I think I speak for my colleagues on this panel. We have full confidence in the Five Eyes. We are very closely lashed up when it comes to all matters cyber, whether it's counterterrorism, counterintelligence, and criminal. That's a fabulous relationship. It's as healthy as it's been for 70 years. And increasingly, as I said, all states that care about the rule of law are engaged on this. Where we have problems is with certain states, Russia in particular, where it's very hard for us to get cooperation and get the actors apprehended. And so we have to hope to grab them when they leave the country and travel. The good news is all the successful cyber criminals have lots of dough and they want to go on vacation. And that's where, with our partners, we grab them up.
Does anyone think there is a potential for a Geneva Convention type of arrangement to be made? Because I consider the cyber world to be a world war taking place right now, each and every day. Is there potential for a set of international rules, even amongst some of the people that we consider to be our adversaries?
Well, yes, there's a potential for it, and one would hope that, and of course it took many, many years for the Geneva Conventions to evolve, and I suspect it probably will in this case as well, but I think the hope is that there could be established some international norms governing behavior, particularly what civilized nation states will do about criminal behavior and the use of the internet for terrorist purposes. And there are many, many countries that have an interest in that.
How do you suggest we begin that process?
Well, certainly the public discourse, I think, is useful. It is certainly a topic within intelligence circles that we discuss with our friends and allies, and particularly the Five Eyes. So there is a growing body of interest in this. But again, I hark back to we're from the intelligence realm, and this really is a policy issue that's kind of over our labor grade.
Well, that answers my question. That's what I was asking. One other question: has North Korea conducted cyber attacks on U.S. companies since Sony?
And your question is, did they?
Have they conducted any that we're aware of since?
Since Sony? Not that I'm aware of. Mike?
We haven't seen any offensive, destructive actions directed against the U.S. corporate sector by the North Koreans since the Sony incident.
Any conjecture? Is there anything that, and you don't have to go into detail, but did America act in any way that maybe has been a deterrent for them to act again?
I certainly hope that's the case. The president came out very publicly, acknowledged the act, attributed the act, and then talked about what we were going to do in response to it, and then talked about, and were we to see continued activity along these lines, we will take additional action, potentially at the time and place of our choosing. I hope that's been effective. I would argue your question was narrowly focused against activity against the United States. I would argue I have watched them do offensive activity against other nations in the post-Sony environment.
Thank you. My time's expired. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Gentleman from Utah, Mr. Stewart, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and gentlemen, thank you for what you do. If there's anyone who's going to save our nation from future chaos, it's the work of you and your agencies taken together. I have great respect for all of you. I consider some of you friends. Mr. Brennan, I've spent a lot of time with some of your guys around the world in the last 6 months, and they are heroes. Admiral, you and I spent some time together last week in Utah. Thank you for your support there. I have a question. I want to get to that, but before I do, Director Clapper, you've said some things that I don't understand, and I hope you can clarify for me if you could. And that is coming back to the OPM breach, and you said it's not an attack, and I guess I would ask you to clarify that, and if I could elaborate just quickly. I understand there may be a technical definition, but there's a couple things that trouble me. One is that we say that we have no evidence of nefarious activity because of that, but we don't know that. If someone is being blackmailed because of this information that's been taken, we wouldn't know that yet. If someone's cover had been revealed because of this information being available, we wouldn't know that yet. So we don't really know what has been the effect of this being taken. And can you define for me what is an attack and what isn't or doesn't meet that definition? Because this seems to me like it would be.
My working definition of whether it's an attack or not, and is in my characterization of it not being an attack in that there was no destruction or of data or manipulation of data, it was simply stolen.
Yeah.
So that's a passive intelligence collection activity, just as we do.
Well, and it seems to me, sir,
And then to your other question is, we don't know what could be going on. That's quite true. All I'm saying is there's been no evidence surfaced to this point of the use of this data in a nefarious way, either against individuals or institutionally. That's not to say we're not mindful of that and that we're not watching for it.
and I'm sure that you are. I do think that it seems to minimize the gravity of this event by characterizing it not an attack, and that saying that at this point we are not aware of any nefarious activity when there very well could be. And many of us view this as simply more than just data mining. But if I could go on to my question, and I need to set this up very quickly because I really would appreciate your response. National security is a matter of cost-benefit analysis. You have nation states that say, here are our ambitions, here are our interests, our goals, and on the other hand, they have to say, kind of measure the cost of reaching those goals or defending those interests. What are the risks or what are the obstacles that they may overcome in doing that? And it seems to me we haven't weighted the scales on the side of our adversaries in making them know and understand the risk and the costs. And I think the effect of that is we've weakened the idea of deterrence. or at least I maybe don't understand the idea of a deterrence. And it seems to me that when we see these attacks, as we have in the recent past, some of them associated with nation states, but they seem to act with impunity. And can you help me understand what is our policy regarding deterrence? And I know that there's some regards to that you wouldn't want to talk about, but it seems to me if we can be more open about how we will respond, that could act as more of a deterrence. And I'm not sure that we've done a very good job of doing that yet.
I personally, this is not a company policy, this is my own view, that until such time as we do achieve or create both the substance and the mindset of deterrence, that this sort of thing is going to continue. The OPM breach, as Admiral Rogers has stated on more than one occasion, this is not a one-off. And we will continue to see this until we create both the substance and the psychology of deterrence.
Well, I couldn't agree with you more. I've editorialized about this a number of times, and it just seems that we enhance our security if we can deter rather than just monitor and take action after the effect. I know there's a fine line you have to tread there because you don't want to reveal our capabilities. You don't want to reveal how we track and in some cases how we may deter or we may retribution. But I'm hoping you agree with me, and Director, it seems like you are, that if we could be more open and more clear about our deterrence policy, that would benefit us.
Those are policy issues, and certainly as Intel guy, I would be an advocate for that, but ultimately that's a policy call.
I understand that. And in 5 seconds, or anyone else on the panel like to address the deterrence? Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Carson's recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we all understand that we face serious threats as it relates to hacking in the cyberspace, but we also are dealing with a larger CVE strategy and the distribution of propaganda and the radicalization of Americans really using online platforms. So I think it's obvious that we have some very challenging concerns about the constitutionality of protected free speech. My first question would be, how effective are these online radicalization efforts domestically? Are there particular subsets of our society that are most greatly influenced? Secondly, outside of encouraging voluntary compliance by Google, Facebook, Twitter, and others, what authorities do you guys have to forcibly remove propaganda and other recruiting materials? And what authorities could Congress empower you with to help in those efforts?
I think I can respond to that, Mr. Carson. First of all, they are, as we've seen over the last 6 to 9 months, these recruitment efforts using social media are highly effective. ISIL started investing in it about 12 to 15 months ago, and the fruit of that was seen with all the people we had to arrest to stop plots late this spring and this summer, because social media works, whether you're selling sneakers or selling the poison of the so-called Islamic State. So it works. In my experience, the social media companies have been highly responsible and responsive in trying to take down media that is offensive and that is related to a terrorist group. The challenge of social media is it's the most complicated spider web in the world. And so you end up having a hard time finding it, and then when you find it and shut it down, it chases to some other place. So it is an enormous problem, and I don't have a simple answer to it. But I do want to say they have been responsive and responsible in my experience. The people who respond to it are troubled minds, people seeking meaning in their lives, and folks seek meaning in all different kinds of ways. Unfortunately, there's an audience for this kind of poison that they'll find meaning in the ultimate battle. At the end of times through the Islamic State. That's craziness, but troubled souls, and we see people who have problems with alcohol or problems with their families or problems with the law and are seeking an orientation in their life, are responsive to this kind of stuff. The FBI's piece in that is trying to do two things at once. First, send a strong message of deterrence, that this is not a way to find meaning in your life. This is a way to find years, maybe decades, in a federal prison. So that ought to factor into people's consideration. And to equip police officers and community service providers and parents with the markers of radicalization. We've gone back through every case we've ever seen and developed a matrix of these are the things that are indicators of that journey, and we're trying to equip people with that so they can see it and help reorient the person.
Has the Citizens Academy been active in increasing awareness or even more community engagement as it relates to a larger CVE strategy?
Yes. Citizens Academy is a part of every FBI field office where we invite community leaders to come in, learn about the work we do, and then go out into the community armed with an understanding of the challenges we face. And they're a key part of that because nobody wants to see these people turn to the dark side in that way. And so our goal, again, we have to be careful because we care deeply, as everybody in this room does, about the First Amendment. So we don't want to have the FBI in the business of trying to tell people, here's the true meaning of Islam. First of all, we're not qualified, but we should be nowhere near that. What we want to do is equip the good people of the United States with an understanding of the markers of radicalization so they can have those conversations.
Well, that's an important work, and we appreciate the work that the Bureau does and the rest of the agencies represented here. I do want to say, though, Director, respectfully, and I think you know this, I don't have to say it, that when we talk about radicalization, Islam does not have a monopoly on radicalization or even cult-like activity. There are so-called Christian groups that are purporting racial mythologies that are just as destructive in the Midwest. When I worked at the Fusion Center, a lot of the calls that we got dealt with white supremacist groups claiming to represent Christianity. Judaism's represented as well in other groups. So I think that in our larger CVE effort, perhaps we can educate the public that Islam does not have a monopoly on radicalization, but we appreciate what you guys do.
Thank you.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Gentleman yields back. Mr. Pompeo is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Director Clapper, I have it right. Good portions of the Patriot Act expire next year. Is that right? Tell me what efforts the intelligence community has put in place. We struggled mightily with respect to a handful of sections, Section 215 and others, to get them put in place in a way that was meaningful and helpful and allowed you to all to perform your functions. Tell me what efforts that you all are engaged in contemplating what happens if those provisions do expire and they're not renewed, or any efforts you're engaged you or the administration are engaged in ensuring that those provisions do not come off the books.
I guess the best response would be to take that one too, as to what the workarounds might be if it totally expires. I guess the hope is that they all won't, and we'll have to figure out workarounds. But I guess I don't think we're prepared here to respond directly to the question, so we'll get that for you.
I just raise it. It seems like a long ways away. The middle of next year, it will be here awfully quickly. We have had enormous struggles legislatively to get these things accomplished, and I want all the members of this committee and all of you to know that there are a bunch of us determined to make sure that these provisions are continued. If they need to be modified in some way, to update them and make them consistent with what we're trying to achieve today, but we should not wait until May to begin thinking about what the impacts are.
You're quite right, sir, and I appreciate your bringing this up, and I'd like to give that a serious response, so we'll get back to you.
This is for anyone, but I'll start with Director Clapper. We've been in negotiations that are now complete with Iran. We have an Iranian Nuclear Review Act that the House is considering today. Can you tell me what the Iranian behavior has been in the cyber world during these discussions? Have there been any noticeable changes, either as the negotiations continued, came to fruition, or where we sit today?
Mike, why don't you?
We have publicly acknowledged, if you step back a little bit, in the 2012-2013 timeframe, we were seeing significant Iranian activity directed against the U.S. financial sector, trying to take down financial websites, flowing out of 13 as the negotiations kicked in many ways. We saw less activity directed directly against us, but I would remind people I have not seen the Iranians step back from their commitment to cyber as a tool, and we see it being used against a variety of actors in the Gulf and in the region. They continue to be fully committed to how can they use this capability to achieve a broader set of national objectives.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I yield back my time.
Gentleman yields back. The gentleman from Connecticut, Mr. Himes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you, all of you, for your commitment of time to us this morning. I want to return to a theme that I was promoting in my opening statement and ask just a couple of questions related to clarity around international norms in the cyber realm. First question, I guess I directed it at Mr. Clapper. There is some debate as to whether currently existing international treaties and international laws of war are perhaps sufficient to provide the clarity that you need operationally. And I understand there's a policy question here, but I'm asking an operational question, which is, do you think that that's true, or do you see the cyber realm as distinct enough from the territorial or other realms such that it would be operationally helpful to have specific clarity around laws and norms in the cyber realm?
Well, I'll offer an opinion, and that's all, not, because it is, as you say, a policy issue. I do think that there needs to be some norms that are specifically tailored for the cyber domain. It's, to me at least, somewhat analogous to the chemical warfare conventions. That it has some technical aspects that I think needed for them to be meaningful and effective, need to be adapted, perhaps drawing on some of the principles of what we now know as international norms in other realms. But I do think there needs to be some tailoring. Mike, you have a view on that?
No, I would echo that. I think that there are mechanisms out there and frameworks that we can draw on. There's certainly some differences within the cyber arena. I'm the first to acknowledge that. I think the important point you raise is clearly we still do not have enough clarity. And clarity, particularly if I put on my operational role as Cyber Command, clarity is everything to me, because that enables speed, that helps enable speed of response, generally help generate better outcomes. So I think it's important for us as a nation, and I would argue more broadly internationally, to come to a sense of, so what are these terms? What are these definitions? What is a framework that enables us to quickly decide what's acceptable, what's unacceptable, and what's an acceptable response? Because currently the environment we're all in right now, I don't think anyone is satisfied with the environment we find ourselves in right now.
Thank you. So last question is, I guess, where are we? Is this an effort to which your respective organizations are actually contributing significant resources, prioritizing? And obviously there's groups that aren't represented here, like the State Department, that would be pretty critical. But is this something you perceived broadly within the U.S. government as a priority?
Well, I think it's clearly a matter of discussion in the interagency. And I think you're quite right. The State Department is probably the better institution to speak to than intelligence.
Any other observations, comments? Okay. Admiral?
I would just say, clearly the IC participates in those discussions. And we get the opportunity to provide a viewpoint and perspective. We try to back that up based on the insights and the data we generate, which is what the expectation is for us as intelligence professionals. I think, clearly we are all frustrated that this is taking us longer than we would all like, but I would not want anyone to believe is not because of a lack of effort, and it's not because of a lack of recognition that this is an issue, a set of issues that fundamentally need to be addressed.
Thank you. Chairman, I yield back. Balance my time.
Gentleman yields back. I want to thank the panel today. Thank you for being here. Thank you for being willing to testify in public. We will have questions that we'll submit for the record, and I think, Director Clapper, there's a couple questions that may have to be answered in a more of a classified setting, but we look forward to receiving those. I'd like to remind members that they have 10 legislative days to submit questions for the record. Before we adjourn, I'd like to just quickly recognize Lynn Westmoreland.
Thank you, Chairman. And I want to thank Director Clapper and Director Brennan and Admiral Rogers for your participation in a Georgia Regents University, the cyber symposium that they're putting on in Augusta, Georgia. As you know, the NSA facility is there and expanding. And I know that Director Clapper and Director Brennan have both stated, as well as Admiral Rogers, about the need for young talent to get involved in this field. I want to thank the director, for sending Miss O'Sullivan down to speak this year. We were hoping we could get you, but we're glad to have Miss O'Sullivan, and the same thing for
You're
Director.
getting a better speaker.
Yeah, and sending Mr. Roche. So thank you all, and thank you for your support and realizing that what we're doing is trying to get young talent to recognize the importance of our cybersecurity. So thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, once again, thank you, gentlemen, and hearing's now adjourned.